was because of this particular document. Turn down the lights a little bit in the back so you can see, because it's going to be very brief. All the documents that I made copies of were done 3 levels of copies. So I saw this document. I was in the middle of researching, and for those of you who don't know me very well, when I get into researching, I'm an avid researcher. That's usually my chair in the corner. And I ran into this particular document. Now, this is after I had already published my book. And I had written about my 4 times great-grandmother, Clara. And I'd always seen her in the 50s and the 60s. I never saw her before 1848. So imagine my surprise when I saw her here. She is there in the census, 1841 census, showing her unfree and belonging, and this is really hard to read, but it says C. Gabriel here. Her children, and I did not know she had a daughter, Somi, and her son, who is my 3 times great-grandfather, right there with her as well, owned by the same person. Now, understanding that we all understand that slavery occurred here in the Virgin Islands. And I think a lot of us, when doing research, do not realize that we should really look at slavery from the researching point of view, because we don't connect the two, right? We don't connect. We've heard Bob Marley's song, Redemption Song, right? He talks about slavery. He talks about how hard it was, but how we should move forward. Y'all know the words, right? Y'all don't want me to sing today.
No, you're good, you're good.
But, and we celebrate the anniversary of, and it's July 3rd, of the emancipation of the slaves here in the Danish West Indies. But do we really, when we're studying our own family history, our personal understanding of ourselves, really think about that time period where our families may have been here and living through, whether as the slave owner or the enslaved? I've been doing research, I've been reviewing research since I was 15 years old. I'm now 50 years old. And last year, late last year, was the first time that I came face to face with my family members. So we're about 100, we're getting ready next week to celebrate 167 years of emancipation. And we really need to think about what was going on with our family members during that time period. What was slavery like? Yes, it was hard, it was tough. It was, we have a lot of misconceptions, but what was it really like for our individual family members? Now today will not be a sociological discussion on slavery. I'm not a sociologist, so it's not happening today. What we're going to talk about is how we find those family members, right, and understand what their life was like. So first we have to find them, right? So let's see if this is good. This is it. I find that a lot of people hit the brick wall right around, now slavery ended in 1848, and we hit the brick wall right about 1860, 1850, right? We find an ancestor there, but we can't get past that brick wall. This is really light. I'm going to read it to you so you can see. There's reasons why we hit brick walls. And so they include extremely common last names. How many of you have Smith or Hodge in your family? Nobody?
Quite that far.
Okay, thank you. Smith or Hodge, how do you deal with that? Right? Or unusual names that have disappeared from the island. Like, I have DeLoyo. Del Hoyo in my family. I have Ardiel. We have names that, you know, people knew these people, but the names no longer exist in the territory. And you know, it's hard to sort of find them. When you see that a man is living with his son and there's no apparent spouse, you're trying to find that mother, and that becomes a brick wall for you because you don't know what maiden name you're looking at or what you're thinking, you know, who to try to find. When you see that man living with a child, or a mother living with the child, but the last names, you know, you're at a loss for the last names because the child is carrying the mother's last names, sometimes by law. The child not living with a parent at all. Now you think that's strange, but it happened a lot, and there is a reason why, because sometimes in more modern time, it was because there were too many children and you needed to move them next door for space, right? But
Or to help.
Or to help.
Somebody who has none.
Or sometimes it was because these children were leased out so that the person could make money. Not the parents, but the slaveholder. So that they could make money. A missing generation. Jeez, I don't know how many times I've come across somebody living with a grandparent. Where did the parent go? All of these cars, you sit and when I say brick walls, for me, I've had 20-year brick walls. So, you know, it's been a long time sometimes. No documentation at all, or no apparent documentation. For the experienced persons in the room, you know, when you do research, you think there may not, you know that there's documentation somewhere, you just can't find it.
Yeah.
Right? And then, when we're thinking about it, we have to start taking into account the important things that are happening during the time period. There's a time period when the group from St. Bart's came in mass. It was a time period that occurred. There was, in the United States, you're looking at the Civil War or the Revolutionary War. You need to think about the activities, or a governor did something and people started leaving. Or now, present here, a good example is the closure of Hovensa. 100 years from now, we're going to see that people were leaving the island, they sort of disappeared and we didn't know where. But if we learn, right, that Hovensa closed and a lot of these people were trained in that industry, then we know to look in New Orleans or Texas or the Middle East or someplace that is also doing oil, right? Because they're moving where their skills are needed. That makes sense?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. So we can break through. I'm convinced because my 20-year block is now clear. So if I could do it, everybody can do it. Oh my God, that's even worse. Don't worry, you're gonna see that document later. So now I'm talking about slavery, and we need to be aware. Remember, I'm not an expert. Did I tell you all that? Okay, good. We need to be aware that there's some misconceptions. Slavery is not strictly a black-white thing. It was not only that people who were white owned people who were black. In fact, that is not always true. So my understanding of the largest plantation here in St. Thomas, anybody has a guess where it was? Think of our estates now. The largest estate.
Botany Bay. Estate
Reason
Thomas.
what?
It's right in town.
Estate Thomas.
Sugar.
You're close.
I want to say bush shelter area.
Estate Contact.
Content.
And it was more, Content took up a whole larger amount of space than you think of now. It was going up into Scott-Free, Soberg, and all of those areas. Estate Contact. Who was the owner of Estate Contact? A colored man. The largest plantation at one point in our history. So it's not a black-white thing necessarily, right? So that's why I said it's kind of complicated, right? These are misconceptions. Another misconception, free-colored people were completely free to do whatever they pleased. How many think that's true? The answer is
No.
absolutely not. You had to wear an emblem if you were free to show that you were free, right? You couldn't go certain places. You had to serve in the militia. There was a set of rules. There are a couple of books that speak about that. Neville Hall. We have his books in the back, right? So another misconception. They couldn't just do what they wanted to do. So when we talk about Peter Tamarind, that's another conversation. But Peter Tamarind and Mingo Tamarind, right? We have to remember that, people say, oh, they were horrible people. So they had to do what they were told to do. Or they could be jailed, or like someone else I'm studying, she was re-enslaved. Imagine she's free. She was a slave. She was captured. She was a slave. She was enslaved. Then she was free. And then they decided to re-enslave her.
She must have wanted to go work.
Well known. There's a book about her in the back as well. Okay, so the next one says the enslaved were not allowed to live in Savannah. Now I've read that, right? That they were not allowed to live in Savannah. Everybody knows where Savannah is, right? Mm-hmm. Where the free colored people of the Virgin of St. Thomas lived, along with other people that were tolerated by the Danish government and the Lutheran Church. So the first Catholic hospital is in Savannah. I'll give a tour next week on the 9th, July 9th. The Jewish synagogue, a Jewish cemetery in the middle of Savannah. The Huguenots in Savannah, right? A lot of people from Curacao and other people coming in and moving out and so forth, living in Savannah, right? And so I've read in books that they say that the enslaved were not allowed to live in Savannah. Where did I find my enslaved 4 times great-grandmother? On Pile Estrada, in the center of Savannah. So, just because somebody tells you that, double check. All enslaved people took on the last name of the slave owner. Now, I have to caution you, when you look at TV and you look at the genealogy shows on TV, they will tell you a couple things that were true in the United States, but were not true here in the territory. One, that we don't have a census of names of the enslaved. In fact, we do. Every time a census was taken of the free population, a census was taken of the enslaved population too. So we can trace by names, right? So that's critical, right? The other thing is that as we talk about the slave owner, realize that most people within the territory did not take on, in fact I can't say all, most people did not take on the slave owner's name unless they were the child of the slave owner.
So where did they get the name from?
They took on names as they were coming out of slavery. They took on various different names for various different reasons. The most popular one that I am seeing is, what's your first name? Dwayne. So, if you had a child, their last name would be Dwayne. Right? So it would be Leal, and Leal's child, Lucy, and Lucy would be Lucy Leal. And I see that a lot. This is not just isolated. This is just how they took on the names. Unless they were the child of the slave owner, and then in recognition of the fact that this is the child, you'd see that last name pop up.
But there's still a lot of slave owner names, right? Because my last name is Turnbull. I can't imagine that being somebody's first
That would be a slave owner's
name.
name.
Okay, because all the.
And he
Turnbull-
had a lot of children.
Okay.
But you are coming out of the BVI
Yeah.
and mixed with St. John because
Yeah.
they're coming through that way. But and the BVI is a little different than the Danish West Indies.
Okay.
So there were certain groups in the BVI, like Mr. Pickering,
Okay.
that required all of his slaves, or not required, told all his slaves that they carry the name Pickering,
Okay.
right? There were others in the BVI, like Nottingham, where because he manumitted his slaves very early, they all took on his name because he gave them land, he gave them crops, he gave them money, he gave them boats and so forth to function, and he gave them a document saying by their names that none of them would ever be re-enslaved nor would ever have to pay taxes. Ta-da! My name is Nottingham. Right? That's a name you're going to want to take on. Let's, I'm a Nottingham person. Right? So that came that way. But others in the BVI said, "Tch." Okay? All right. So upon emancipation, the enslaved were required to move off the plantation. Okay, so let's talk about the seniors that couldn't do for themselves. The law required it. The Emancipation Proclamation itself said you have to keep them. They can't do for themselves, you have to keep them. It's in the Emancipation Proclamation itself. If they're infirmed, you have no choice but to support them for the rest of their life. If you could do for yourself, and because the Danes kept really great records, they would do a census of these individuals. They knew by name who was not infirm, what age they were, what kind of work they did, what church they belonged to, when they were baptized, right? And that information, right, indicates, well, this person is strong and healthy, because they had to indicate that too in the census, that they had a certain time where they could leave. But they didn't want them to leave because they still needed to get this work done. So they had to go into a contract with them. So that it was required in the Emancipation Proclamation itself. Now, when you're doing your history and you're looking at stuff, make sure, oh, this is horrible. Make sure, could you turn off the back and see if we can see some of this? I would always recommend, can you see any of that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, I would recommend that you do a timeline. So I did a quick, brief timeline. It's not all inclusive, and maybe you might want to include certain things in your timeline, especially if you know that your ancestor was involved in something special, like a boat builder, and when boats, the types of ships, a shipwright, and when the types of ships and the types of boats changed in their design and stuff like that. Those are specific things to your family, but this is just general. 1733, slave uprising in St. John. We all know about that one. There are stories and diaries that specifically, and a court case that specifically outlines what is going on at the time. 1792, the announcement of the abolition of the transatlantic slave trade under the Danish flag begins. And they're announcing it in advance of 1803. What happens in this day? Between 1792 and 1803, you have hundreds and thousands of slaves coming through, because they are now ramping up their supply because they know it's going to end. So now you're seeing a lot of people coming through. This is amazing amount of people coming through at this time period. 1803, the official cessation of the transatlantic trade for the Danes. Of course, you know it didn't stop. That was the official, but then you see people coming in with servants, lots of servants. And you see that when you look at our records coming through right at 1804. They now change the designation of who they're coming through with. They go to other places, right, and then come through, and then they're calling them differently, okay? And then you still had illegal activities going on. 1834, really critical to our understanding, slavery is abolished in the BVI. And you had a lot of traveling between St. John and the BVI. A lot of the families that you think normally BVI, you will find in St. John, especially in the early years. So don't think that, and if you don't have anybody in St. John now, don't leave St. John out in your research. If you're a Crucian as well, you should also look at St. John. Somehow or the other, there's such a strong tie between especially those from Frederiksted and St. John. Families like the Bastion family and so forth, ties there. You don't find them here in St. Thomas so much, but you find them in Frederiksted and in St. John. So there's a strong tie there, and then there's a strong tie between the BVI and St. John. And then obviously the strong tie between St. Thomas and St. John is a time period where every free colored of means had property in Coos Bay and also had property in St. Thomas. Did you know that? Newquarter, up on Tannenberg and Ross, you'll see St. Jonians in mass. Okay, 1848, everybody knows that, right? 1878, we still weren't getting paid enough to survive. Contract they did not offer the contract as they were supposed to on contract day, and they burned the place. There's court cases, there are diaries, there's all kinds of things that outline these things, and you'd be surprised where we see our ancestors show up. 1917, the transfer. And that's important because a lot of the records created for originally to look at property, the enslaved, then stopped at the transfer because the Danes stopped doing the records, right? The U.S. took over, and the U.S. was not doing, we're not keeping the same types of records. So some of the records that you will see in the next slide, that's better, right? Some of the records you will see continued from the early 1800s, sometimes the 1700s, all the way to 1917. And then, so you now have to look at a whole other set of records. So these are resources to look at when we're talking about looking for our enslaved ancestors or looking for those that are in our family that were slave owners. Census records. And all these records are available here at the Caribbean Genealogy Library at Alcoa's Mall. The census records, critical in our understanding. Mr. Gates, Henry Louis Gates, will tell you that it's very unusual to find your enslaved ancestors by name. Not so in the territory. You're very likely to do so. Very, very, very likely. The 1803 free colored census is also another resource because you never know. When you're looking at another record, which is the church records, you will find that many persons baptized, many enslaved Africans baptized their children in exchange for their freedom. So, did y'all hear that? So, I'll take my my fourth great grandmother, right? She baptized her two children Catholic. She's a Catholic. Very unusual, usually Moravian. Most of the enslaved population were Moravians.
Yeah.
The Moravians spent a lot of time working towards that. But there was a law that said you needed to be able to register the religion of, and you needed to attend church if you were free. So you had to show that you were attending church to be a good citizen. And you also needed to make sure that everybody in your household, whether it be enslaved or not, be baptized. So you will have awesome baptismal records that will tell you all kinds of things. It will say something along the lines of, and for the Catholic Church, it will say, ABC person, son of enslaved person this name, and father that name, or they'll say the enslaved person belonging to this person, and the father belonging to, or free father of this person has been, and the child has been baptized, and the child is free as a result of the baptism. You will see all of that. It gives you a full genealogy to at least 2 generations, right? And the census will give you sometimes, in certain censuses, the early ones, they will tell you what date the baptism was. Specific date, May 28th, right? 1803. It was like a birth date. You had to remember your date when you, right? The Moravian Church provides even more records, and that's why we were so excited when they got their grant, because their grant will be able to help them bring this information forward. But their records sometimes show if it is an African-born ancestor, and my 4th great grandmother happens to be African-born. If it's an African-born great grandmother or whoever, it will show what tribe, if they're Moravians, which tribe they came from and what was their name before they changed their name. So Clara's name might not have been Clara, right? And so they would show Clara Gabriel, which is the last name she used, right? And then it will show the other name that she arrived to this port with, and then it will show which tribe of which area she came from.
Yeah, that's what led to the man.
That is real stuff.
Yeah, well.
So at this point, we'll help you learn about your DNA, but we could do it without the DNA. Right? Okay, so we also have the websites, and we'll be looking at some of these documents today. We have the website. You can use the Genealogy Library has a website with all kinds of awesome documents on it and links. We also have Ancestry. I know it costs some money, but sometimes for me it's worth it, because somebody will ask me and I'll do a quick search for you, and bam, there's the information. Right? It's better for St. Croix than for St. Thomas, because St. Croix has their Danish period on Ancestry. St. Thomians are not so lucky, right? But still, we can find compensation letters for the BVI online on Ancestry, or we can find some compensation letters. You know what compensation letters are?
No.
Okay. Do I have it on my list? No. Okay, a compensation letter. So, in 1848, the slaves were emancipated. The enslaved were emancipated. Remember, they were considered property. So, that's your hat there, right? I take your hat from you. As in, you no longer own hats. The hats cannot be in style now. You sent me a letter saying, "Dear government, I own a hat and you took it from me. I'd like this money back. It was valued at this amount." So the compensation letters were letters that said, "These are the slaves that you have emancipated through your legislation, my property, and these are the names of these enslaved people, and I want money for them."
And some are more valuable than some.
Absolutely. Compensation letters. Travel and transportation records. People were moving back and forth, and it's helpful to understand where they were in life and so forth and so on through those records. Recorder of deeds. You're going to see some recorder of deed document today that is going to blow your mind. How is that related to slavery? We're going to see about that one. You'll see it in a few minutes. So here's the reimbursement letters I spoke about. Matricles. So the matricles are really the land tax documents. They want to know, the Danes had to tax you, right? So they wanted to know, how big was the house that you owned? So how many square allens? And so you'll see that, right? So you'll see the address, you'll see the size of the house, and they will tax you for that. And if you have slaves, they will also tax you for that. And they'll tax you in accordance to how many adult males, how many adult females, how many male children, and how many female children. And there are different prices for different tax rates for each. And so you'll see how many of them are in the household, or how many of them you own on the plantation. So those are the matricles. Really important, because